I want to talk about sleeping with a stranger. No, it's not anything what it sounds like. But I want to talk about sleeping with a stranger. And specifically, I want to talk about the adverse effects of war. The adverse effects of war. And if it's not something that you are not going through yourself, not now, and not something that you have personally experienced, I doubt very seriously that you would ever fully understand. And I don't really think you could. I think it's unfair to expect anyone to fully understand the adverse effects of war and the impact that it can have not only on the individual, but on those around them. For men and for women, spouses and significant others, those of who have husbands or wives of combat veterans, they could awake to find themselves feeling as though they have been sleeping with a stranger, because the person has changed so much. And they may often find themselves asking, who are you and what have you done with my husband? What have you done with my wife? They may ask themselves the question, or ask of those who are with them, who are you and what have you done with my dad? And what have you done with my mother? Or what have you done with my child? Now this is my take. So don't hate. Thank you very much. Good Thursday morning. Welcome to another episode of My Take on this beautiful Thursday. What is it? November the 18th, 2021. And what a blessing it is to be here today. And I am grateful, and I hope that you are. Thank you very much. I think it may have been a couple of weeks ago that we had a conversation. And during the course of that conversation, I began to talk about some of my experiences in the war. I really don't remember exactly what I was talking about at that time, but I do remember that I wanted to explain it a little bit further, and it was kind of at the end of the message, and I didn't want to take the time to do it. Plus, I really wasn't in any shape to talk about it at that particular time. So hopefully, I'm in better shape today, and I'll be able to get through this without any incident. So just make sure that you cover me, because I'm going in. And I'm talking about I am going in, okay? And I need your prayers. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. But I want to take a look at PTSD. And I want to look at it from the perspective or from the point of view of a person who may be, a person or persons, who may be living with an individual who suffers from that condition known as PTSD. Now, PTSD is more commonly known, as it is more commonly known, I should say, is a condition that is called post-traumatic stress disorder. And it more often occurs, at least that's the way we think of it, as a result of some traumatic experience of war. But it really can happen as a result of any traumatic experience. I mean, it can happen to doctors, it can happen to healthcare workers, it can happen to law enforcement officers. It can happen to just individuals who have gone through some terrible traumatic experience. Or you hear what I'm saying? So it is not something that is specifically limited to combat veterans, but that's my perspective today. And I won't go into all the technicalities of this disorder, but I will talk to you about what my experiences are, at least to some extent, what my experiences are. And I'm not so much ministering to it. I hope that as we go through this, that it will serve as some measure of therapy for any person who suffers from PTSD. But I particularly want to talk to those who live with those persons, who work with those persons, who are connected in some way with those persons, to try to help us get to a place, or help you get to a place where you can understand people like me, people who have suffered or who are suffering from this dreadful condition known as PTSD, okay? So I want to share from my own personal experience, at least to some extent. And for me, no matter what the technical term for PTSD is and what the technical description or definition is, I can tell you what it is to me. And for years, I didn't know what was going on with me. And And finally, I went to the doctor, and we were able to, look at and check some things out. And finally, we realized what was going on. But for me, it's about things that I still see. It's about things that I still smell. It's about things that I still hear, and it's about things that I still feel. It's about things that I still experience that really I should have been over a long time ago. I mean, it's like a bad memory that you can't forget, or a nightmare that you can't awake from. And I'm talking about for me. Now, anything and everything affects people differently. All right, so somebody else may be going through something different than what I experienced. And please understand that I'm not really certainly not offering any medical advice, not even any counseling. I'm simply offering a portion of my own personal experience with PTSD and how people have responded to me and reacted to me and not really knowing what I've been going through. If you know or think, listen, if you know or think you are suffering from PTSD, or if you know someone who may be, please contact a doctor. See a doctor immediately. Help is available. And I want to encourage you to please take advantage of whatever help is available. If you need help, please get the help that you need. Okay? Now, I fought with the 173rd Airborne Brigade in the Vietnam War in 1968, and I was 18 years of age at that time, if you can believe that. It was not just an assignment. I was the point man in a small recon unit that spent most of our time deep in the jungle, where we saw plenty of action. And as a matter of fact, we kind of had the attitude that we were looking for action. You know, I have killed people, and I've seen people killed, and we were always in constant danger and under constant threat of attack. And I want to tell you, we did some horrible things, and there were some horrible, terrible things inflicted upon us. The effects of war. You know, and war has a way of changing who we are. It has a way of changing who we become. And we become people that sometimes that we don't even know ourselves. We don't even know who we are. We don't know what we're going through. We find ourselves feeling ways that we never could have imagined. We find ourselves doing things that were unheard of, and enduring things that we never thought that we could. I mean, war, you heard the expression, but war truly is hell. And in Vietnam, we battled snipers and ambushes and booby traps, and even the terrain and the insects and the animals of the jungle became enemies to us. And we battled personal fears and anxiety that would bring the best of us to our knees. And I don't mean to our knees in a word of prayer. And it was difficult to see the mangled bodies and the guys struggling to live in spite of missing limbs and in spite of having their chests open wide or their abdomen open wide, or even their head open wide. It was tough to see even dead bodies of your friends and even of your enemies. That it was hard to see. And I mean, we were in a situation where we were, stuck like Chuck. We couldn't mourn. I mean, we couldn't stop to even think about it. We couldn't dwell on it. For our own sake and for the sake of those who survived, we had to just keep it moving. And the stench of dead, decaying bodies and the smell of burning flesh was more than we could take. And some guys coped by using drugs, and some couldn't cope. They snapped and lost it there on the battlefield. And some even pretended injury or even injured themselves purposely in order to escape the hell of war. And I mean, it was a terrible, terrible situation. Here I am, 18 years of age. And there were others like me. And then there were others who took it out on each other. They took it out on their superiors. We had to try and distance ourselves from the reality of what we were witnessing, what we were experiencing. We had to become hard and calloused and even hateful. And back then we had a saying, as we would look upon our fallen soldiers, our friends lying there, our buddies lying there, and pieces of bodies out of our troops, and even of the enemy's troops, scattered about the battlefield. And we would take we couldn't look very long. Sometimes you would sort of get into a stare, but your mind would wander. We generally would take a quick glimpse, just look at the situation, then turn and walk away and say, don't mean nothing. Don't mean nothing. There's your friend laying there dead, blown apart, and the only way you could deal with it was just to walk away and say, don't mean nothing. They meant something. It did mean something, but that was our way of dealing with it. Don't mean nothing. And we just kept walking. You couldn't afford to stand there. You couldn't afford to think about it. Because, before you know it, maybe you get shot, get blown up. So you had to just push through it. You had to just keep going. And as I looked at some of them, the bodies didn't even look real. Maybe I didn't want them to be real, but they were real. Torn, scattered, dead, but real. And there were times that drugs were supplied and passed around, and guys would use drugs, but I refused to use drugs because I don't want my judgment clouded or impaired. I'm the point man. I'm the one that's out front. And I once told someone, if I get killed, I want to know about it. I want to know that I'm dead. I want to know it. So I didn't want to use drugs. For years, my way of coping with it was suppressing it, ignoring it, refusing to acknowledge it, didn't even want to think about it. I didn't even acknowledge that it had happened. And every time it would come up, I'd just push it back. Every time it would try to rise in my memory, I would push it back down. I refused to talk about anything military, look at anything military. I refused. I couldn't. I was really, to be honest about it, I was really afraid of what it might do if I thought about it, if I allowed myself to entertain what had happened. I was just afraid of how I would react. I didn't know. And I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know. And so I would just keep pushing it back. But over the years, it only got worse. It got worse. And so certain sounds, I'm talking about everyday sounds, would trigger it. Certain images, what you would look at as everyday images, would trigger it. Certain behaviors would trigger it. And it would be something that you wouldn't understand, but something that's normal, that's usual. There were times that I would, and even now, when I drive down the highways and I would look off into the woods or something, it would just kind of take me back to the jungle. And I could just see myself back there. And that's what PTSD is like. It's like trying to escape a memory. It's like trying to escape that memory. And what people don't understand is that it's actually more than a memory. It's not just something you think about. But, and again, this would be hard for you to understand this, but you can still smell the death. You can still hear the sound. You can still see the enemy. And so it got worse. Over the years, it just kept getting progressively worse. And not only do I suffer from PTSD, but my son, who spent several tours in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in Kuwait, he suffers from PTSD. He's been diagnosed with PTSD. And it's rough. But people that around us, that we live with, that we work with, that we interact with, they don't know. They don't know what you're dealing with. They don't know what you feel. They don't know your pain. They don't know your struggle. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the presence of that past experience is still there. And so when it comes to the surface, you don't quite know how to deal with it. When it comes to the surface, sometimes it's tough to deal with it. And so after mine, it got progressively worse. And I've been treated with medication. I've been treated with counseling. And I finally decided that I wouldn't let it beat me. I wouldn't let it get the best of me. I refused to let it get me down. So I decided to face it. I decided to talk about it, to confront it. And really, I decided to just dare to bother me. I dare you to mess with me. I look at it like I do the devil. I dare you. I dare you to do anything. And so, whereas there was a time I wouldn't talk about it, and now I try to talk about it. And even now, I'm struggling to get through it. But that's the way I do day by day. I push my way through because I said, no, you're not going to beat me. You're just not going to do it. And so, I don't try not to get a lot into this quote telling war stories, but I still acknowledge it. I do acknowledge it. I talk about it, and it was a time I wouldn't wear a cap like this. I wouldn't wear military clothing, but now I do because I have to confront it. I have to deal with it. So I talk about it sometimes, and so I embrace the idea that I served, and I'm proud that I served, and I'm thankful that God brought me through that. And in many ways that people are impacted, and you can't always see their scars, you can't always see their injuries. And let me tell you something, don't you ever question whether somebody's disability. Don't ever question somebody's disability. You don't know what people are going through. You don't know what they've been through. You don't even know what's wrong with them right now, if you want to call it that, something wrong with them, what affects them right now. Are you hearing what I'm saying? And so I try very hard, and I know this doesn't sound very good, it probably doesn't make any sense, but I try very hard to see the benefits of a bad experience. I try to see the benefits of a bad situation. And so, PTSD and I, we sort of come to an agreement, and we sort of learn to share the stage. Sometimes I win, and sometimes it wins. Sometimes it wins. And I was diagnosed with PTSD years ago. And again, there are a number of ways to deal with it, or that people choose to deal with it. Let me put it that way. There are a number of ways that people choose to deal with this disorder. Again, there's medication, there's counseling, there's, of course, all the negative and destructive ways of coping with it as well, such as suppressing it, ignoring it, drinking or doing drugs to try to forget it or try to escape from it, or just to try to deal with it. And it was years before I could really talk about or associate myself with anything that looked or sounded like military. I don't want to have anything to do with that. And for some combat veterans, we find it difficult, to let certain things go. We find it difficult to trust people. We find it difficult to relax in certain situations. And sometimes it's you're up all night. Sometimes you got to get away from people, and people don't understand that. They don't know what you're going through, and they think it's this, they think it's that. And how people tend to diagnose us themselves and evaluate us. And that could be anybody with anything. But we find it difficult to let things go. We find it difficult to get through things because we still struggle with this. And I'm grateful to what the Veterans Administration is doing to try to help us. And I appreciate so much all the help that they do. It has its faults. The VA, trust me, it has more than its share of faults, okay? But there's a lot of good that they do. That's one thing that I'm grateful for, is that they really, as far as I'm concerned, really care about the veterans and really doing all that they can to help the veterans. It's difficult. It's difficult sometimes for us to switch roles. Coming out of a combat situation, going into what we call a civilized situation, sometimes it's hard. It's hard to understand I'm not in war anymore, because that's something that has been ingrained in us. It's hard sometimes to turn the faucet off. Let me tell you something, my friend. When you have been taught to kill, when you have been trained to kill, and it's been drilled into you to kill, to hate, At some point, listen, you got to be able to turn it off. But in many cases, unfortunately, that is proven to be easier said than done. And when you've been taught to hate a certain people and look upon them as your enemy and to shoot on sight, where do you draw the line? How do you draw the line? And for some, they never even see the line. They never saw the line. Some they never knew there should be a line. And because of their anger, because of their frustration with war, because of what happened to a buddy of theirs, they never wanted to see a line. Many people drifted into killing because they were taught and trained to kill, and not necessarily because they had to kill. Trained, taught, that's what we do. And what happened, and many of you know the story, at least heard the story, it's been years now, but many of you have at least heard about the story, maybe the news account or something, what happened to Lieutenant Calley and what happened at a little town called My Lai in South Vietnam. Let me tell you something, my friend, that was no isolated incident. That was no isolated incident. It happened all the time, all over Vietnam, wherever combat was going on, wherever troops were. And I know it did where I was. Guys drifted into killing simply because they could kill. Oftentimes we made a game of war, and people still do that. Soldiers still do that. The military still does that. A competition of war where trophies were awarded to those with the most kills. We still do that. But even on our own, we took mementos of the battle, especially during the early years of Vietnam, before the government and before the military began to get a handle on things. And I don't particularly want to be too graphic, but guys have become such savages and such barbarians. This is what war will do to you. That guys, and I never found it all that appealing myself, but guys would cut off ears and cut off body parts and actually wear some of them around their neck, keep some of them for souvenirs. And that's the way. That's what war can do to your mind. I mean, can you imagine? And otherwise, these guys will be what we call normal, everyday guys, probably church-going people, college kids, whatever. And there are certain things that during war, especially the kind of war during Vietnam, there were certain things. And let me tell you something, my friend. I don't care what anybody tell you. There are certain things even now that are allowed, certain things that are overlooked, certain things that are ignored in war. And that's just the reality of the situation. And you know why in many cases they do it? Because look at what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to go out there and die. That's what they're asking you to do. Go out there and die. To sacrifice yourself for your country. And many of us did it willingly. So what do they care about you drinking? What do they care about you using drugs? They're asking you to go out there and die. So oftentimes things were overlooked, things were ignored. But again, as the war progressed and became more civilized, if there is such a thing in war, the government, the military, as those reports came in, they began to investigate, they began to make some changes, they began to do something about it. So I don't want to make it sound like, everybody were off the chain and the government didn't care. Well, sometimes they didn't care, depending on how far the situation went. But that's war, and that's what war does to people. There shouldn't be wars. We gotta find a better way to resolve our differences besides war. Sending young boys and girls off to war to die, to lose limbs, and to go through mental and emotional experiences that scars them for the rest of their life. We shouldn't do that. And I thank God. I thank God that I learned to appreciate. When I think about discipline, I thought that discipline was just for you to make sure that you obey orders, to make sure that you stay in line, to make sure that you do what you're supposed to do, all of that. And that's what I thought about discipline. But I thank God that I've learned to appreciate my training, my teaching, and I've learned to appreciate the discipline that was instilled in me. And I have a greater appreciation for discipline, period. But I'm grateful for all that I learned as a soldier, as a trooper. I'm glad for that which has taught me restraint. And instead of working against me, it helps me to draw the line and to stay on the right side of that line. Are you hearing what I'm saying? So when I look at the training that I have, when I look at my experience of all the combat training that I went through, all the basic training, all of that I went through, and they always stressed discipline. I didn't really know how that would benefit me all that much down the line. I thought they just wanted to make sure that I obeyed when they told me to do something. But I've learned that discipline kept me from becoming a murderer. Yes, I killed, but I was not a murderer. Yeah, that gave me some sense of restraint. And I think that's part of what helped me refuse to cut off ears and to refuse to mutilate bodies. I think it was that training, that discipline. And I like to think that it was something perhaps that my mother instilled in me, and I certainly know that it's something that God put in me. And I'm glad about it. I'm glad about it. I'm glad I didn't go that far. When I was later in my life, when I became a state trooper, and when I was shot as a state trooper, and the bad guy was shot, this was a big time drug dealer, was shot, and at that point, he was disabled. Once he was shot, he was disabled. And I was still able to move about, even though I had been shot. But I disabled him. He was no longer a threat. And I could have easily killed him just for the hell of it because he had shot me. And it likely would have been ruled justifiable homicide. No big deal, no problem. But it wouldn't have been right. It really would have been murder because I would have killed simply because I could do it. Listen, the real point of my sharing all this with you is, and I don't mean this in any humorous or comical way, but if you don't know, please ask somebody. If you don't know how to deal with your combat veteran, please ask somebody. If you don't understand the behavior of your combat veteran, please, my friend, ask somebody. Seek help. If you don't know how to help your combat veteran, how to help him or her to cope with the situation, how to help him or her to heal, then please ask somebody. Please ask somebody. These relationships require a great deal of patience. They require a great deal of understanding. And these kinds of relationships, when you have people in your family involved in a relationship with that suffer from PTSD, they require solid commitment to that combat veteran. They require compassion for their condition. These situations, circumstances, they require a strong support system. These situations require education and training for you and the entire family. Let me tell you something, my friend. If you have a combat veteran in your life, if you have a combat veteran in your home, I got to tell you, if they suffer from PTSD, this is not quite the person, not quite the same person that left home months or years ago and are now back. It's a different person, depending on how severely they've been impacted by PTSD. When I served as a pastor of a church in Elberton, her mother approached me to ask me about her son and what she should do about her son who was hooked on drugs. She talked to me about how he had been stealing and robbing, how he had stolen from her own purse, how he had stolen from their own house, their own home. And she was disappointed that she couldn't trust him, that she didn't feel safe leaving anything, laying around the house, or couldn't even leave him there alone. She was very disappointed, very hurt, and you can understand that. She thought this is my own son, the one that I gave birth to, the one that I raised, that I took care of. She couldn't understand how such a thing could happen involving her own child. She didn't get it. She didn't understand it. And although I'm not a doctor, I'm certainly not a doctor, I did explain to her my understanding of the situation. And here's what I told her. I advised her accordingly. And here's how I put it. I told her, this is not your son. This person that you are looking at, that you are living with, or that's living with you, this is not your son. This is someone who is controlled by drugs, controlled by demons. And under normal circumstances, he would never do this. Under normal circumstances, you could absolutely trust him. But here's what I told her, but not now. He cannot be trusted because of his condition. He cannot be trusted and he should not be trusted. And I told her, I said, what you need to do is seek help in how to deal with and how to live with a person that is hooked on drugs. Similar situation with a person suffering from the adverse effects of war. One who may be suffering from PTSD. You're dealing with a totally different person. And it requires special attention, special understanding, special patience, special love, and special training. As a pastor, I could easily tell you, well, just pray about it. And I will tell you, please pray about it. But also seek professional help for you and for your combat veteran, my friend. Now that's my take. What do you have to say? Sound off. Thank you for your prayers. Thank God that we made it through. Amen. It was a little bit rough. We hit a few potholes, but we made it. And this is what we want. We want victory over PTSD. Praise the Lord. God bless you, my friend. Go on and enjoy your Thursday. Thank you for spending a little time with me. But if you're in those situations, please, my friend, get help. Talk to somebody. Get help for you. Get help for your combat veteran. Whether you're a friend, whether you're a relative, whether you're a spouse, whether you're a significant other, whether you're a parent, child, whatever the situation might be. Help. There's all kinds of help out there. You don't have to go through this by yourself. Please be patient. Don't be so critical. Don't be mean towards them. Please don't. Just try your best to understand and be patient, okay? We love you. God bless you. May God continue to keep you is my prayer. God bless.